Sometimes, the most dangerous people look like the least threatening. Sarah Martinez learned this truth the hard way when three strangers decided she looked like easy prey on a quiet Tuesday evening. What they didn't know was that beneath her 5 feet 4 inches frame and gentle smile lay the heart of a warrior who had survived 2 tours in Afghanistan and earned her Army Ranger tab through blood, sweat, and unbreakable determination. In the next few minutes, these would-be attackers would discover why you should never judge a book by its cover, and why some people carry themselves with quiet confidence for very good reasons. This is the true story of how a chance encounter in a parking lot became a masterclass in why respect isn't just good manners, it's survival instinct. Sarah Martinez pulled her Honda Civic into the nearly empty parking lot of the 24-hour grocery store, the headlights cutting through the October darkness. The dashboard clock read 9:47 p.m., later than she usually preferred to shop, but her demanding schedule as a physical therapist at the Veterans Hospital left little room for regular grocery runs. She had just finished a double shift helping wounded soldiers regain their mobility, and her own body ached from the long day. As she stepped out of her car, Sarah automatically scanned her surroundings. Old habits from her military training never truly died, even 3 years after hanging up her uniform. The parking lot was mostly empty except for a few scattered cars near the store entrance, and a beat-up pickup truck parked in the shadows near the back of the lot. Something about the truck's positioning made her mental alarms quietly ping, but she pushed the feeling aside. Not everything was a threat, she reminded herself. Sometimes a truck was just a truck. Sarah locked her car and started walking toward the store, her sneakers silent on the asphalt. She moved with the unconscious grace of someone who had spent years carrying heavy equipment across hostile terrain, though to any casual observer, she looked like just another tired woman heading home after a long day. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore scrubs under a light jacket. Nothing about her appearance suggested that she could field strip an M4 rifle in under 2 minutes, or that she had once single-handedly held off an enemy patrol while her wounded teammate called for extraction. The automatic doors of the grocery store slid open with a soft whoosh, and Sarah grabbed a shopping cart. The fluorescent lights inside were harsh after the darkness of the parking lot, making her squint as her eyes adjusted. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her shopping list, mentally calculating how quickly she could get everything and head home. Her small apartment waited for her with a frozen dinner and whatever mindless television show might help her unwind. As Sarah moved through the aisles, she noticed the store was unusually quiet. Besides herself, she saw only an elderly man comparing cereal boxes in aisle 3 and a tired-looking clerk restocking shelves near the pharmacy. The checkout lanes were mostly dark except for one express lane, where a bored teenager sat scrolling through his phone. It was the kind of peaceful evening that most people took for granted, the simple luxury of running errands without looking over your shoulder. Sarah picked up milk, bread, and the other essentials on her list, her mind already shifting toward the next day's schedule. She had 3 new patients arriving at the hospital, all recent amputees who would need careful guidance as they learned to navigate their new reality. It was demanding work, both physically and emotionally, but it gave her a sense of purpose that she had struggled to find after leaving the Army. These veterans understood the weight she sometimes carried in her eyes, the way certain sounds could make her pause, the subtle way she positioned herself in rooms to always have a clear view of exits. The transition from military to civilian life had been harder than Sarah expected. After 8 years in the Army, including her grueling Ranger training and 2 combat deployments, the ordinary world felt strangely fragile and unpredictable. In Afghanistan, the threats were clear and immediate. Here at home, danger could come from anywhere or nowhere at all. Learning to turn off the hypervigilance that had kept her alive overseas was an ongoing process, one that her therapist assured her was completely normal for combat veterans. Sarah finished her shopping and headed toward the checkout lane, her cart wheels squeaking softly on the polished floor. The teenage cashier looked up from his phone with the expression of someone who was counting the minutes until his shift ended. His name tag read Tyler, and he couldn't have been more than 17 years old. Sarah smiled at him as she began placing items on the conveyor belt. "Long day?" she asked, making the small talk that helped both of them remember their shared humanity. Tyler shrugged and started scanning her items. Yeah, but only got like an hour left. You look pretty tired yourself. Sarah nodded. Double shift at the hospital. Ready to get home and put my feet up. My mom's a nurse, Tyler said, his demeanor warming slightly. Says it's the hardest job in the world, taking care of people all day. Your mom's a smart woman, Sarah replied. Takes a special person to work in healthcare. As Tyler bagged her groceries, Sarah felt that familiar sense of connection that came from meeting someone who understood the weight of caring for others. It was one of the things she appreciated about working at the Veterans Hospital. Everyone there, from the doctors to the custodial staff, seemed to understand that their work was about more than just a paycheck. They were helping people rebuild their lives, one small victory at a time. Sarah paid for her groceries and wished Tyler a good rest of his shift. She pushed her cart toward the exit, already looking forward to the quiet comfort of her own space. The automatic doors slid open again, and she stepped back into the cool night air. The parking lot seemed even quieter now, with fewer cars than when she had arrived. The streetlights cast long shadows between the rows of empty parking spaces, creating a checkerboard pattern of light and darkness. As Sarah walked toward her car, she noticed that the beat-up pickup truck was still in the same spot near the back of the lot. This time, she could see 3 figures leaning against it, their silhouettes barely visible in the shadows. They appeared to be watching her, though it was hard to tell for certain from this distance. Sarah's military training kicked in automatically, her peripheral vision expanding and her pace remaining steady despite the spike of adrenaline in her system. She reached her car and began loading groceries into the trunk, keeping the cart positioned so she could see the truck in her peripheral vision. The 3 figures had straightened up and seemed to be moving in her direction, though they were trying to look casual about it. Sarah's mind rapidly assessed the situation. 3 potential threats, unknown capabilities, moving to close distance while she was isolated. Her hands continued their methodical work of transferring grocery bags while her brain shifted into tactical mode. Sarah closed the trunk and returned the cart to a nearby corral, using the movement to get a better look at the approaching men. They were all young, probably in their early 20s, wearing dark clothing and moving with the swagger of people who thought they owned the night. The leader was tall and thin with close-cropped hair, flanked by a shorter, stockier companion and a third man who seemed nervous, constantly looking around as if expecting trouble. "Excuse me, miss," the tall one called out when they were about 30 feet away. His voice carried the false friendliness that predators often use to get close to their prey. "You wouldn't happen to have a cigarette, would you?" Sarah's keys were already in her hand, positioned between her fingers in a way that would turn them into weapons if necessary. She had learned this technique not in the army, but from a self-defense class she had taken as a teenager. Sometimes the old skills were the most useful ones. "Sorry, I don't smoke," Sarah replied, her voice calm and neutral. She moved toward her driver's side door, maintaining visual contact with all 3 men while creating distance. "That's too bad," the tall man said, his companions spreading out slightly to flank her. "Maybe you could help us out with something else. We're a little short on cash, and you look like you might be able to spare a few dollars." The request itself wasn't unusual. Sarah had been approached for money plenty of times in various parking lots and street corners. What set off her alarm bells was the way they were positioning themselves, cutting off her escape routes and moving with the coordination of people who had done this before. This wasn't a random panhandling attempt. This was a predatory hunt, and she was the target. Sarah kept her expression neutral while her mind ran through her options. She was outnumbered 3-1, but she had advantages they couldn't see. Years of hand-to-hand combat training, weapons expertise, and combat experience in actual life-or-death situations. More importantly, she had the element of surprise. These men saw a small woman alone in a parking lot and assumed they held all the cards. "I wish I could help," Sarah said, continuing to move toward her car door. "But I just used my last cash inside the store." The stocky man laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the nearby cars. "Come on, lady. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Just empty your purse, and nobody gets hurt." Sarah's hand found the door handle of her car. She was close enough now that she could dive inside and lock the doors if necessary. But something told her that running wasn't going to be an option. These men had positioned themselves too well, and the nervous one was now moving to block her path to the store. They had done this before, probably many times, and they were confident in their ability to intimidate and overpower a lone woman. What they didn't know was that Sarah Martinez had faced down enemy fighters who were better armed, better trained, and far more dangerous than 3 parking lot predators. She had earned her Ranger tab by proving she could think clearly under pressure, adapt to rapidly changing situations, and use whatever resources were available to complete the mission. Right now, her mission was simple: get home safely, no matter what it took. The tall man took another step closer, his hand moving to his jacket pocket in a gesture that was meant to suggest he might be armed. Look, sweetheart, we can do this easy or we can do it hard. But either way, you're going to give us what we want. Sarah felt the familiar calm that came over her in dangerous situations. Her heart rate slowed, her breathing deepened, and time seemed to stretch out as her combat-trained mind assessed every detail of the environment. She noted the positions of nearby cars that could provide cover, the distance to the store entrance, the body language of each attacker, and a dozen other factors that would influence the next few seconds. Okay, Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying a different tone now. The fear that the men expected to hear was completely absent, replaced by something they couldn't quite identify. But you should know something first. The 3 men exchanged glances, confused by her sudden change in demeanor. They were used to victims who begged, pleaded, or tried to bargain. They had never encountered someone who faced them with the calm assessment of a professional warrior. Sarah's hand remained on her car door handle, but she turned to face them fully, her stance shifting almost imperceptibly into a combat-ready position. To the untrained eye, she still looked like a tired woman in scrubs. But anyone with military experience would have recognized the subtle signs: the balanced weight distribution, the relaxed alertness, the way her free hand hung naturally at her side, but ready to move with lethal speed. The tension in the parking lot was thick enough to cut with a knife. The 3 men stood frozen for a moment, unsure how to process this unexpected development. They had targeted what they thought was an easy mark, but something in Sarah's voice and posture was making them reconsider their assumptions. The tall leader glanced at his companions, seeing doubt creeping into their faces. "Look, Army girl," the stocky man said, trying to inject menace back into his voice. "I don't care what you did over there. This is here, this is now, and you're still outnumbered 3-1. So quit trying to act tough, and just give us your money." Sarah's smile widened slightly. She had heard variations of this same bravado countless times during her military service, usually from new recruits who thought they were tougher than their training instructors. It never ended well for them either. 3-1, Sarah repeated thoughtfully, as if considering the odds for the first time. "You know, that's actually better than some situations I've been in. There was this firefight outside Kandahar, where 12 Taliban fighters tried to overrun our position. We were down to 4 soldiers, low on ammunition, and no immediate backup available." She paused, her eyes never leaving the 3 men as she continued her story in the same conversational tone someone might use to discuss the weather. "The thing about being outnumbered is that it only matters if your opponents know what they're doing. These Taliban fighters, they had home field advantage, superior numbers, and they knew the terrain better than we did. But you know what they didn't have?" The nervous man who had been blocking her path to the store was now shifting uncomfortably from foot to foot. Something about Sarah's calm confidence was deeply unsettling to him, triggering instincts that told him this situation was going sideways fast. "They didn't have proper training," Sarah continued. "They didn't understand the importance of coordinated movement, effective positioning, or maintaining discipline under pressure. Most importantly, they made the same mistake you 3 are making right now." "What mistake?" the tall leader asked, despite himself. He was caught between his desire to maintain control of the situation and a growing fascination with this strange woman who was treating their robbery attempt like a casual conversation. "They underestimated their target," Sarah replied simply. "They saw American uniforms and thought they knew what they were dealing with." "Sound familiar?" The stocky man took an aggressive step forward, frustrated by the way this encounter was developing. He had expected tears, pleading, maybe some screaming. Instead, He was getting a military history lesson from someone who seemed completely unafraid of three armed men. "Enough of this garbage," he snarled. "I don't want to hear about your war stories. I want your purse, your wallet, and whatever cash you've got, or things are going to get ugly fast." Sarah nodded thoughtfully, as if he had made a reasonable point. "You're right, talking isn't going to solve this situation. But before we move to the next phase, I want to give you one last chance to walk away." She gestured toward their pickup truck in the distance. "You can get in that truck, drive away, and forget you ever saw me. Nobody gets hurt, nobody calls the police, and you all go home tonight to sleep in your own beds. It's a good offer, probably better than you deserve." The three men exchanged glances again. The nervous one was clearly ready to take her up on the offer, but the other two were committed to seeing this through. Pride and greed were powerful motivators, even in the face of mounting evidence that they had chosen the wrong target. "And if we don't take your generous offer?" the tall leader asked with mock politeness. Sarah's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her posture. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but suddenly, she looked less like a tired hospital worker and more like exactly what she was, a combat veteran with nothing left to lose. "Then, you're going to learn why the Army spent so much time and money training me," Sarah said. "And it's going to hurt. A lot." The stocky man had apparently heard enough. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a switchblade, the metal gleaming under the parking lot lights as he flicked it open. The sound of the blade locking into place seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet night air. "There we go," Sarah said, her voice carrying a note of something that might have been satisfaction. "Now we're being honest with each other." The appearance of the knife changed the legal dynamics of the situation entirely. What had started as a robbery attempt had now escalated to assault with a deadly weapon, which meant Sarah was legally justified in using whatever force necessary to defend herself. More importantly, from a tactical standpoint, the presence of a blade told her everything she needed to know about these men's intentions and capabilities. "You see," Sarah continued, seemingly unperturbed by the weapon now pointed in her direction. "In Afghanistan, we learned to read people very quickly. You had to, because your life depended on being able to tell the difference between a genuine threat and someone just trying to scare you." She studied the three men with professional interest, like a scientist observing lab specimens. "The way you're all standing, the way you're breathing, the fact that only one of you is actually armed. It tells me you've probably done this before, but always against targets who didn't fight back." The nervous man was now backing away slowly, his instincts finally overriding his loyalty to his companions. He had seen enough action movies to know that when someone started talking like Sarah was talking, things were about to go very badly for the bad guys. "Jimmy, where are you going?" the tall leader hissed at his retreating companion. "This is wrong, Marcus," Jimmy replied, his voice shaking. "She's not scared. She's supposed to be scared. Something's really wrong here." Marcus, the tall leader, turned back to Sarah with renewed anger. The situation was slipping out of his control, and he could feel his authority over his small gang eroding with each passing second. He had built his reputation on being able to intimidate people into submission, and this woman was making him look weak in front of his crew. "You think we're scared of you?" Marcus demanded. "You think because you tell us some stories about being in the Army that we're going to run away? Well, you're wrong, lady. Dead wrong." Sarah sighed, a sound that somehow conveyed both disappointment and resignation. "I really hoped you'd take the easy way out. But some people just have to learn things the hard way." The stocky man with the knife moved first, lunging forward with the blade extended towards Sarah's midsection. It was a clumsy, telegraphed attack that would have been laughable to anyone with serious combat training. Sarah had been expecting it from the moment he drew the weapon, and she moved with the fluid precision of someone who had practiced these exact movements thousands of times. She sidestepped the knife, thrust, while simultaneously grabbing the attacker's wrist with both hands. Her left hand gripped his wrist to control the weapon, while her right hand struck his elbow joint with enough force to hyperextend it in the wrong direction. The knife clattered to the asphalt as the stocky man screamed in pain and surprise. Before Marcus or the remaining member of their group could react, Sarah had pivoted and driven her knee into her first attacker's solar plexus, doubling him over and sending him gasping to the ground. The entire encounter had taken less than 3 seconds, and one-third of her opponents was now out of the fight. Holy crap, Jimmy whispered from his position near a parked car, where he had taken shelter as soon as the violence began. Marcus stared in shock at his companion writhing on the ground, clutching his damaged arm and struggling to breathe. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. Victims were supposed to be helpless, not capable of disarming attackers and putting them down with clinical efficiency. What the hell was that? Marcus demanded, his voice cracking slightly. Sarah picked up the dropped switchblade and closed it, slipping it into her jacket pocket. That was basic hand-to-hand combat training. Every soldier learns it, but Rangers practice it until it becomes muscle memory. Your friend here telegraphed his attack so clearly that I had 3 different counters ready before he even started moving. She looked at Marcus and his remaining companion, a thin man with a scraggly beard who looked like he desperately wanted to be anywhere else in the world. So, Sarah continued conversationally, we're down to 2 of you. Would you like to keep going, or are you ready to take my original offer and walk away? I should mention that things are only going to get more unpleasant for you from here. Marcus looked down at his injured friend, who was still curled up on the asphalt making pained whimpering sounds. The reality of the situation was finally starting to penetrate his anger and pride. This woman wasn't just tough talk and intimidation. She had genuine, practical skills that she was willing and able to use. But Marcus had spent too many years building his reputation as someone not to be messed with to back down now, even in the face of overwhelming evidence that he was outclassed. His identity was tied up in being the alpha predator in his small corner of the criminal ecosystem, and admitting defeat to a lone woman would destroy everything he had built. You got lucky, Marcus said, pulling out his own knife, a larger, more serious blade than his companion's switchblade. But luck runs out, Army girl, and we still outnumber you. Sarah's expression shifted slightly, and, for the first time, Marcus saw something in her eyes that made his stomach clench with fear. It wasn't anger or hatred or even excitement. It was the cold, professional assessment of someone who had killed before and would do so again if necessary. Marcus, she said quietly. That's your name, right? Your friend over there called you Marcus. Marcus nodded automatically, unsure why he was answering her questions. Marcus, I want you to understand something very clearly, Sarah continued. Up until this point, I've been trying to end this situation without seriously hurting anyone. But you just escalated to a deadly weapon, which changes the rules of engagement completely. She gestured toward his knife with one hand while the other remained casually at her side. In Afghanistan, when someone pointed a blade at me or my teammates, we didn't try to disarm them gently. We eliminated the threat as quickly and efficiently as possible, using whatever force was necessary to ensure our own survival. Marcus felt his mouth go dry. The woman standing in front of him bore in. Marcus charged forward with his knife raised, moving with the desperate aggression of someone who had committed to a course of action despite every instinct telling him to run. His attack was fueled by pride, desperation, and the dim hope that his superior size might give him an advantage that his companion had lacked. Sarah watched him approach with the detached calm of a professional. She had seen this exact scenario play out dozens of times in training exercises and real combat situations. An untrained opponent with a blade, driven by emotion rather than tactics, telegraphing their intentions with every movement. It was almost textbook. As Marcus closed the distance between them, Sarah did something that completely defied his expectations. She moved toward him rather than away. This aggressive counter-movement threw off his timing and brought her inside his extended knife arm before he could adjust his attack. Her left hand shot up to control his weapon hand, while her right elbow drove hard into his solar plexus. The air exploded from Marcus's lungs in a harsh wheeze, but Sarah wasn't finished. She used his forward momentum against him, stepping to one side while maintaining control of his knife hand and allowing his own charge to carry him past her. As he stumbled forward, off balance, and gasping for breath, Sarah swept his legs out from under him with a movement so smooth it looked almost like a dance. Marcus hit the asphalt hard, the knife skittering away across the parking lot. Before he could even think about getting back up, Sarah's knee was pressed against his spine, and her hand was twisted in his hair, controlling his head position with uncomfortable efficiency. "Don't move," Sarah said quietly. Her voice carried the absolute authority of someone who had restrained hostile prisoners in active combat zones. "If you try to get up, I will dislocate your shoulder. If you try to reach for the knife, I will break your arm. If you do anything other than lie still and breathe, you will discover that I know 17 different ways to cause you permanent injury without killing you." Marcus lay motionless, his cheek pressed against the cold asphalt. The fight had gone out of him completely, replaced by the dawning realization that he had made a catastrophic error in judgment. This woman wasn't just trained. She was experienced in ways that his street-fighting background could never have prepared him for. The thin man with the scraggly beard was backing away slowly, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. "Look, lady, I don't want any trouble. I was just along for the ride, you know? This wasn't even my idea." Sarah glanced at him while maintaining her control position over Marcus. "What's your name?" "Derek," he replied quickly. "Derek Thompson. I live over on Maple Street with my grandmother. I work at the auto parts store downtown." This was just supposed to be easy money. Nobody was supposed to get hurt. "Well, Derek Thompson from Maple Street," Sarah said. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to help your friend here get to a hospital for his arm. And then you're going to find new friends who don't rob women in parking lots. Because if I ever see any of you again, anywhere, anytime, the results will be much more unpleasant than what happened tonight." Derek nodded frantically. "Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. We'll stay away from you. Stay away from this area, whatever you want." Sarah looked down at Marcus, who was still face down on the asphalt under her knee. "What about you, Marcus? Do you understand the new rules?" "Yes," Marcus gasped, his voice muffled by the pavement. "Yes, I understand. We'll stay away. We won't bother you again." "You won't bother anyone again," Sarah corrected him. "Because if I hear about you three targeting other women, I will find you. And next time, I won't be nearly this patient or gentle." She released her hold on Marcus and stepped back, allowing him to slowly push himself up to his hands and knees. He moved carefully, afraid that any sudden movement might provoke another demonstration of her capabilities. The stocky man with the injured arm was sitting up now, cradling his damaged limb against his chest. His face was pale with pain, but he was breathing normally again. Sarah's professional assessment suggested he probably had a hyperextended elbow and some soft tissue damage, but nothing that wouldn't heal with proper medical attention. "Your friend needs to see a doctor," Sarah told Derek. "His elbow is going to swell up badly if you don't get it looked at soon. There's an emergency clinic about 2 miles south of here that's open all night." Derek helped his injured companion to his feet, while Marcus slowly stood up, moving like an old man despite being probably 20 years younger than Sarah. The fight had taken something out of him that went beyond physical pain. His entire worldview had been challenged and found lacking. "We're going," Marcus said quietly. "We're leaving right now, and you won't see us again." Sarah watched as the three men made their way slowly toward their pickup truck, supporting the injured man between them. She remained alert until they had actually started the engine and driven away, their taillights disappearing into the distance. Only then did she allow herself to relax slightly. The parking lot was quiet again, as if nothing had happened. The only evidence of the confrontation was the closed switchblade in Sarah's jacket pocket and some scuff marks on the asphalt where the fight had taken place. To anyone who might have been watching from inside the store, it would have looked like a brief conversation followed by the departure of some late-night shoppers. Sarah retrieved her car keys from where she had dropped them during the fight and loaded the last of her groceries into the trunk. Her hands were steady as she performed these mundane tasks, but she could feel the familiar post-combat adrenaline beginning to work its way through her system. It was a sensation she remembered well from Afghanistan, the strange combination of alertness and exhaustion that followed any violent encounter. As she drove home through the quiet streets, Sarah reflected on what had just happened. Part of her felt satisfaction at having successfully defended herself against multiple attackers. But another part of her felt a familiar sadness about the necessity of violence, even in self-defense. She had hoped that leaving the military would mean leaving behind the need to hurt other people, but apparently the world had other plans. Her apartment was a small but comfortable space that she had carefully arranged to feel safe and peaceful. The walls were decorated with photographs from her military service alongside more recent pictures from her work at the Veterans Hospital. It was a place where the two halves of her life, the warrior and the healer, could coexist without conflict. Sarah put away her groceries and made herself a cup of tea, settling into her favorite chair with the warm mug cupped between her hands. The familiar ritual helped center her thoughts and process the events of the evening. She had learned in therapy that debriefing after stressful situations was important for maintaining psychological health, especially for combat veterans who might be triggered by civilian violence. The physical confrontation itself had been relatively straightforward. Three untrained attackers with poor tactical awareness against someone with professional combat experience. The outcome had never really been in doubt once they escalated to weapons. But the emotional aftermath was more complicated. Sarah found herself thinking about Marcus and his companions, wondering what circumstances had led them to believe that robbing women in parking lots was a viable life strategy. Were they desperate for money? Addicted to drugs? Simply products of a system that had failed to provide them with better alternatives? She didn't excuse their behavior, but she couldn't help wondering if there might have been intervention points where their lives could have taken different directions. These were the kinds of thoughts that kept many veterans awake at night. The recognition that violence was sometimes necessary, but that every act of violence represented a failure of society to find better solutions. Sarah had learned to live with this paradox, but it still weighed on her during quiet moments like these. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her supervisor at the hospital, reminding her about the new patient assessment scheduled for tomorrow. Sarah smiled slightly as she read the message, appreciating the way her work provided structure and purpose to her civilian life. Helping wounded warriors rebuild their strength and mobility felt like a natural extension of her military service, a way of continuing to serve even after hanging up the uniform. As she prepared for bed, Sarah made a mental note to drive a different route to the grocery store in the future. Not because she was afraid of encountering Marcus and his friends again. She was confident they would keep their word about staying away, but because she preferred to avoid situations that might require violence when possible. The warrior skills would always be there when needed, but she hoped they would remain buried beneath the surface of her civilian life. Sarah's last thought before falling asleep was about the 3 new patients she would meet tomorrow. 2 were recent amputees learning to walk with prosthetics, and 1 was dealing with traumatic brain injury that affected his balance and coordination. They would need patience, encouragement, and skilled guidance as they learned to navigate their new realities. It was challenging work, but it was also deeply meaningful, the kind of purpose-driven mission that made all the other complications of life worthwhile. In her dreams that night, Sarah found herself back in Afghanistan. But instead of carrying weapons, she was helping wounded soldiers learn to walk again. The dream landscape shifted between the harsh mountains of the Hindu Kush and the sterile corridors of the Veterans Hospital, but her mission remained constant, helping others find their strength in the face of seemingly impossible challenges. When she woke the next morning, Sarah felt refreshed and ready to face whatever the day might bring. The events in the parking lot felt like something that had happened to someone else, filed away in the part of her mind that stored necessary but unpleasant memories. Today was about healing, growth, and moving forward, the better angels of human nature that made all the struggles worthwhile. No resemblance to the tired hospital worker he had initially targeted. This was a predator talking to prey, and he was suddenly, horribly aware of which role he was playing in this encounter. "Last chance, Marcus," Sarah said, her voice carrying the finality of an executioner's axe. "Drop the knife, help your friend get to a hospital, and never let me see your face again. Or find out what happens when you threaten someone who has been trained to kill people like you." The thin man with the scraggly beard broke first. "Marcus, man, we need to go? Right now? This is insane." But Marcus was trapped by his own image, his own need to be seen as the toughest person in any given situation. He raised the knife and took a step towards Sarah, sealing his fate with that single movement. Sarah smiled again, and this time it was the expression of someone who was about to enjoy their work. "What you should know," Sarah continued, her voice carrying across the quiet parking lot with perfect clarity, "is that I spent 8 years in the United States Army. 2 tours in Afghanistan. I earned my Ranger tab by proving I could handle anything that anyone could throw at me. And, right now, you're about to find out why messing with someone like me is the worst decision you'll make tonight. The 3 men paused, suddenly, uncertain. The tall leader's swagger faltered slightly as he processed what she had just told them. His companions looked to him for guidance, clearly having second thoughts about their chosen target. But pride and momentum carried them forward, even as their instincts began screaming warnings. "You're bluffing," the tall man said, but his voice lacked the confidence it had held moments earlier. "You're just some nurse or whatever, trying to scare us off." "Well, it's not going to work." Sarah smiled then, a cold expression that never reached her eyes. It was the same smile she had worn when enemy fighters had underestimated her capabilities in Afghanistan, right before they learned why American soldiers were feared around the world. "We'll see about that," she said.